So you had to get into the early 60s. What was your initial thoughts on design, creating early 60s Maine, but kind of in a Stephen King world?
Well, the early 60s Maine, Maine, we always decided between Andy that Maine was probably a little bit behind. So there's a lot of 50s in there, a lot of 50s blending in, because it's a smaller kind of place, a little bit farther from the latest and greatest. The trickiest part was not so much the 60s for the regular town and the houses, but we were shooting in Canada and we had to do all the 60s Air Force.
Yeah.
So that was a tricky part because Canada doesn't have, a lot of bases. In the States, there's a lot of disused bases that you could use and things like that. We had very little to choose from, so that was the trickiest part. And of course, we had to really combine. I think we had 3 separate locations and a bit of VFX help, obviously for the B-52s and all that kind of hardware. But that was I think the hardest part of this one was getting the 60s.
Now, there's been a lot of pressure with the sewers. You got the book, you've got, the movies, but even the book, like it's so well described. People have such an ingrained vision of what it is. What were your thoughts of you have to honor the book, but at the same time, you got to make it your own?
Well, I did the second film, so I was already part of I didn't do the first film, but I did the second one, so I inherited the designs from the first and reworked them a little bit for the second, and then of course, we kept that same language going, because it's one of the main features of the first 2 films, so that was fun. I mean, we didn't build as many sewers this time, but I think the journey was longer within what we built, actually, this time.
Of course, in the finale, we had the final conflict with Pennywise. That must have been really challenging. What were the biggest challenges of trying to pull off that sequence?
Well, as you imagine, it's a frozen lake for the most part, and we didn't have the stage we had was full, and we had to empty it out and put in all that dressing within it was 5 days for the ice, but we had 2 weeks to take everything out and put everything back. So that was the really tricky part. And of course, I wasn't even sure whether we'd be able to, it was basically a faux painted ice treatment, but it actually worked really well with the blowing snow. The visual effects didn't have to do very much to it, and I thought it'd be replaced a lot, but in the end, the guys didn't have to do much. So it was fun. There was a lot of visual effects help with the whole environment around there.
Yeah.
We built some trees and the major tree, but it wasn't the biggest stage, so that was the trickiest part. The trick was for the cameraman to get far enough away from the foggy backdrops. Really, that was the biggest part.
It must have really helped the actors, though, where you had a little less visual effects than you expect to get into the character because it's such a dramatic fight.
Yeah, and we were in there for, I think it was about 6 days in there. So, there's a lot of characters for that finale. Everyone kind of came together, and we're kind of in this limbo land except for the tree. So we had to, from my end, the 6 days we set it up and it was pretty straightforward. They just made do, but for shooting, it was pretty tricky. I think it was pretty tricky for them.